You know, when you think of Steve Jobs, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's the black turtleneck, right? The massive product launches, maybe that legendary intensity. But here's the thing. Those are just the details on the surface. His real legacy, the thing that's truly worth studying, isn't what he made. It's how he thought.
And that right there, that's really the heart of what we're going to dig into. This isn't going to be a history lesson about the iPhone. Nope. This is about the mental operating system that created it. It's about a set of intellectual disciplines that, frankly, are more valuable today than they ever have been.
So let's go beyond the turtleneck. Let's try to deconstruct the mental models that we're running in the background. We're going to explore a system that's really built on just a few powerful, interconnected principles. Principles that, honestly, anyone can use to sharpen their own thinking and the quality of their work.
And here's why this is so critical right now. Think about it. AI is making the how, the actual execution of tasks, unbelievably easy, almost a commodity. But what it can't do is tell you what to build, or more importantly, why. The skills that truly matter are shifting away from just doing things and moving towards judgment. And that is exactly what the job system is all about.
Okay, so where does it all begin? Well, it starts with the first pillar, a radical, almost ruthless discipline of focus. And I guarantee his definition of focus was probably way different from how most of us think about it.
Just listen to that for a second. What's so powerful here is that he's not talking about saying no to bad ideas. I mean, that's easy, right? Anyone can do that. He's talking about the incredible discipline it takes to look at a good idea, maybe even a great idea, and say no, all to protect the one single thing that is truly essential.
So this forces us to completely reframe how we think about focus. For most of us, focus means getting better at managing our to-do list. For Jobs, it was about aggressively, relentlessly curating a stop-doing list. It's a process of subtraction, not addition. The real question becomes, what are you willing to get rid of to make room for something truly great?
And you know, this wasn't just a metaphor. Not at all. When he came back to Apple in '97, the company was a mess. He famously slashed about 70% of the product line. He took dozens and dozens of confusing products and boiled them down to just 4. That is what saying no looks like in the real world. For every single yes that changed everything, there were literally 1,000 no's that made it possible.
And you see, this intense discipline of focus, it isn't the end goal. It's what creates the space for the next pillar, an obsession with clarity. Because once you've said no to all the noise, you finally have the mental bandwidth to do the incredibly hard work of achieving true simplicity. And for Jobs, that work was anything but simple. Now, this is a crucial distinction. Clarity, in his world, isn't about ignoring the messy details. It's the exact opposite. It's about diving so deep into the complexity of a problem, understanding it so profoundly that you can come out the other side with a solution that feels simple, elegant, and obvious. It's an earned simplicity, not a superficial one.
And there's a real process to this. It's not magic. First, you have to completely immerse yourself, soak up every single detail of a problem. Then comes the hard part. You have to wrestle with it. You argue about it. You turn it over and over and over in your mind. And only after all that struggle can you finally distill it down to its absolute, undeniable essence. It is a grueling intellectual workout.
Okay, so you've got this intense focus, which gives you the space for deep clarity. And that leads us to the third, and maybe the most nuanced pillar of this system, a deep sense of taste. This is the glue that held everything else together. And it was about so much more than just how something looks. It was about connection and human judgment.
In this system, taste is really the ability to connect ideas from totally different fields. It's the deep understanding that a product is never just a list of technical specs. It's an object that has to fit beautifully and seamlessly into a human life. It's the bridge between the purely logical and the deeply emotional.
So let's try to break this down a bit. What is taste, really? Well, it starts with seeing hidden patterns. Think about that calligraphy class he famously took in college and how he connected that to the need for beautiful fonts on the Mac years later. Then it's about valuing the aesthetic details, knowing that the exact curve of a corner or the satisfying click of a button isn't just a minor detail. It contributes to an overall feeling of quality. It's also about integrating humanistic values, building tools that empower people. And finally, all of this comes together to form a strong, unapologetic point of view, having the conviction to say, this is what good looks like.
So let's bring it all back to today. We've got these 3 ideas: intense focus, hard-won clarity, and a deep sense of taste. Why on earth does this system for thinking matter so much right now, in the age of AI?
Well, it's because AI is making execution a commodity. It can write code, it can generate reports, it can draft designs faster than any of us can. But what can't it do? It can't apply judgment. It can't muster the clarity to define the right problem to solve in the first place. And it certainly can't exhibit the taste to know what will truly connect with people on a human level. Those skills are becoming incredibly rare and incredibly valuable.
And that, right there, is the ultimate takeaway. In a world where anyone and anything can execute, the quality of your thinking is your only real competitive advantage. Focus, clarity, taste, these aren't just vague personality traits he was born with. They are disciplines. It's a system for thinking. And it's a system that anyone can learn and cultivate.
So I'll just leave you with this final thought. AI can give us a million answers in the blink of an eye. Our job, our new job, is to use focus, clarity, and taste to ask better questions. The kind of profound, simple, and insightful questions that lead to work that actually matters. You know, we hear the name Steve Jobs, and we immediately think of genius, right? But today, we're going to dig into something really specific, one of his most powerful and honestly, kind of counterintuitive, mental models. It's a way of thinking that's going to challenge pretty much everything you've ever been taught about what it means to focus. So let me just ask you straight up, what does focus really mean to you? When you think about it, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it just concentrating harder? Pushing through all the noise? Just hold on to that thought for a second, because we're about to look at this from a completely different angle.
All right, first things first, we've got to talk about this common trap, this focus illusion. It's this idea about what focus is that almost all of us buy into because it's just so deeply baked into how we think about work.
Yeah, for most people, focus is all about adding something. You think, I just need to add more effort, put in more hours, concentrate harder. You try to brute force your way to paying attention to what's important. But let's be real, where does that usually lead? It's a straight path to burnout. You just end up feeling drained and totally spread thin. And this is exactly where Steve Jobs comes in and just flips the whole script. He saw that trap for what it was and completely turned the idea of focus on its head. For him, real focus wasn't about what you're actively doing. Nope, it was all about what you consciously choose not to do. It really boils down to this simple idea from him. Focus wasn't about adding things on. It was about subtraction. It's this disciplined, relentless process of just pruning, snipping away at everything that isn't absolutely essential. Such a simple sentence, right? But wow, the implications are just massive. Okay, so let's really break this down. The conventional way of thinking about focus, it's about finding one good idea and saying yes to it. But the Jobsian way, that's about seeing 100 other really good ideas and having the discipline to say no to almost all of them. It's a huge shift, right? You stop chasing this idea of abundance, more, and you start valuing coherence, making sure the few things you do choose fit together perfectly. And this wasn't just a theory for him. He actually did it. I mean, the most famous example is when he came back to Apple in '97. The company was a mess, making over 300 different products. What did he do? He took a giant axe to the product line and chopped it down to just 10. 10. Think about that. It wasn't because he was out of ideas. It was because he understood that to achieve true greatness, you have to say no to almost everything else. That's what lets you pour all your energy, your soul, into the few things that truly matter. So you might be wondering, what's the big deal? Why is saying no so powerful? Well, it's because failing to eliminate, it has this heavy, hidden cost. Let's really dig into what happens, what the real price is when you say yes just one too many times. Okay, think of it like this. Every single time you say yes to a new feature, a new project, whatever, you're adding another layer of complexity. And that complexity, it's like a thick fog that rolls in. It makes it super easy to hide from the tough questions, to avoid making the really clear, hard decisions. To get to clarity, you have to be willing to make those difficult choices and cut right through that fog. Otherwise, you get stuck in this vicious cycle where you're rewarded for adding more stuff and punished for striving for simplicity. And this brings everything right back to us here and now. For today's professional, this is everything. I mean, we're living in an age of just endless information, endless possibilities, especially with AI coming on strong. Thinking this way, this Jobsian focus, it isn't just a nice little preference anymore. It is an absolutely critical skill for anyone who wants to lead or create something meaningful. And let me be super clear about this. What we're talking about here is not some cheap productivity hack, okay? This isn't a time management trick. You're not going to find this in some listicle titled 5 Ways to Be More Productive. No. This is a deep, fundamental, strategic discipline. It's about how you orient your entire way of working, maybe even your life. So let's actually put a name on this so we can really grab onto it. Let's call it strategic elimination. What is it? It's the conscious, strategic decision about what will never matter. Think about that. It's about drawing a hard line in the sand up front and saying, everything on that side of the line, it doesn't get my attention. Period. No matter how shiny or tempting it looks. That is what creates the space you need to do truly exceptional work.
So we kind of end up right back where we started, but hopefully with a totally new way of looking at things. The most important question you can ask yourself isn't, what am I going to focus on? The truly powerful question, the one that's actually going to lead to clarity and real impact, is this. What are you going to choose to eliminate?
All right, so today we're going to do something a little different. We're not here to talk about the life story of Steve Jobs. Instead, we're going to try to unlock the way he thought. We're talking about a powerful mental model that, honestly, anyone can use to create meaningful work, especially in this crazy distracted world we all live in. I mean, you feel it every single day, right? That constant buzz of notifications, the endless back-to-back meetings, this relentless pressure to just do more, not necessarily better. It feels like we're drowning in information, but at the same time, we're just starved for real wisdom. We're always busy, but let's be honest with ourselves. Are we actually being effective? So in an environment like this, being able to find that one clear signal in all of the noise, well, that's not just a skill anymore. It's a superpower. And Steve Jobs, he was an absolute master at this. His whole approach gives us this incredible guide for how we can start to reclaim our own attention and ultimately our impact. Okay, so where does it all start? Everything in his way of thinking, his entire mental model, it begins right here, with the very first pillar, a relentless, almost obsessive pursuit of clarity. Seriously, this is the bedrock. It's the foundation that all great work is built on. But here's the thing you have to understand. For Jobs, clarity wasn't just about minimalism. It wasn't just about making things look simple on the surface. No. It was the end result of a really intense intellectual battle. It was about wrestling with a problem, really wrestling with it, long enough to truly deeply understand its core essence. And this quote from Da Vinci, which was one of his all-time favorites, just captures it perfectly. True simplicity isn't where you start the journey. It's the destination you have to earn. It's that profound elegance you finally arrive at after you've wrestled with and conquered all the messy complexity, not by just pretending it isn't there. Okay, so let's say you've done the hard work. You've achieved that clarity. So what's next? Well, you have to protect it. And you do that by applying it through the second pillar of his mindset, the discipline of focus. You see, for Jobs, focus wasn't this passive Zen-like state. Not at all. It was an active verb. Sometimes it was even an aggressive one. It was the strategic, and let's face it, often really difficult act of elimination. It meant consciously abandoning perfectly good ideas to make room for the few, truly great ones. I mean, he really said it best himself with this quote, and this is so crucial. It's also psychologically really hard, right? Because it often means you have to disappoint people. But the big insight here is this. Every single time you say yes to one thing, you are automatically, implicitly, saying no to 100 other things you could be doing with that time and energy. Focus is all about making that choice deliberate and intentional. So let's make this real. What does this actually look like in practice? Well, when Jobs came back to Apple in 1997, a company that was on the brink of bankruptcy, by the way, they were making something like 350 different products. Can you imagine? It was just a total mess of complexity and confusion. And then, after just 1 year of applying this ruthless, disciplined focus, what happened? He slashed that entire portfolio down to just 10 products. 10! That brutal act of elimination didn't just save Apple from going under. It cleared the path for the iPod, the iPhone, and, well, everything that came next. So that kind of brings the question back to us, doesn't it? We all have our to-do lists. They're probably a mile long. But what's on your stop-doing list? What's that one good idea, that routine task, that recurring meeting that you could intentionally say no to this week, just to make space for something great? So saying no is kind of like your offensive strategy, right? It's about actively clearing the clutter that you can control. But you also need a powerful defense. And that relentless elimination, well, that's the foundation for our third pillar, developing a total intolerance for noise. And when I say noise, I mean so much more than just actual sound. Noise is that meeting that just drifts on without any real purpose. It's that vague feedback that creates more questions than it answers. It's all the little bits of friction in a process. Really, it's any force, whether it's internal or external, that waters down quality and pulls you away from that clear purpose you worked so hard to find. Ultimately, this whole idea of being intolerant to noise, it isn't just some productivity hack. It actually comes from a really profound respect for the fact that our time and our energy are finite. They're not limitless. So it's a commitment to protecting those precious resources for the work that is truly, uniquely yours to do. So you get clarity, you apply focus, and you filter out the noise. That gets you to really excellent, effective work, for sure. But there's a fourth pillar. And this is the one that elevates work from just excellent to truly transcendent. It's the most subtle of the four. And maybe, just maybe, the most powerful. It's about cultivating a sense of taste. Taste? What is that really? It's that elusive quality that separates something that's just good from something that's absolutely unforgettable. And it's not just about how things look, not just aesthetics. It's a deep intuition for the human experience. It's an understanding of how technology and design and humanity can all intersect to create something that feels, well, not just useful, but almost inevitable. So the big question is, how do you develop it? Well, it's a practice. It's not something you're just born with. It starts by learning to see connections that other people miss. It demands this uncompromising, almost stubborn standard for quality. It means you have to sweat the details, the tiny little things. And it all culminates in this big shift in your thinking. You stop just building a product and you start meticulously crafting an experience. Here's a little exercise for you. Next time you use something you genuinely love, could be an app, a tool, anything, just pause for a second and try to deconstruct why you love it. What specific, tiny choices did the creators make that resulted in that feeling? That right there, that's the beginning of developing taste.
All right, so let's bring all four of these pillars together, because this mental model, which was really born decades ago, has honestly never been more relevant than it is right now, today, in the age of AI.
You have to see how it all works together as one cohesive system. Clarity, that gives you the destination. It's your North Star. Focus, that's the ruthless editing that keeps you on the right path. Filtering out noise, that's the shield that protects you on your journey. And taste, taste is what makes the destination worth arriving at in the first place. And here's the really crucial point for us today. As AI gets better and better at automating the routine analytical stuff, the what and the how, our greatest professional value starts to shift. It shifts to the very things that AI can't replicate. Things like our judgment, our ability to focus, our discernment, and our taste. So this model we've been talking about, it's not just some historical curiosity. It's a blueprint for how to thrive in the future of work. And so that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. The world is always going to offer you more ideas, more tasks, and more distractions than you can possibly handle. That's a given. So the fundamental question isn't really what you're going to do. The real question is, what are you going to choose to ignore to make room for what truly, deeply matters?
You know, we live in an era that's just swimming in data, algorithms, and AI. And it's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking that technical skill is the only thing that really matters anymore. But what if the most important advantage, the real game changer, isn't technical at all? Today, we're going to dive into a quality that's deeply human, something you can't code, but you can definitely build.
And of course, Steve Jobs said it best, technology alone is never enough. He was convinced that the real magic, the real innovation, happens when technology crosses paths with the humanities. And honestly, that idea feels more urgent and true right now than it ever has before.
So, what is this crucial human element he was talking about? Well, Jobs used a really simple word for it: taste. Now, I know what you're thinking, but this isn't about whether you prefer one color over another. For him, taste was a form of disciplined, intentional judgment. And it's so important that we get that distinction right. And here's the most important part. Taste isn't some mysterious gift you're just born with. Not at all. It's a skill. It's a kind of judgment that you sharpen over time, by exposing yourself to all sorts of ideas, by learning from the things that don't work out, and by staying committed to always learning more.
This brings us to a really key comparison: data versus human judgment. Now, these two aren't enemies fighting for control. Think of them more like partners, each with a very different, very specific job. You could say data looks backward, while taste looks forward.
Let's break that down. Data is all about the past. It's fantastic at analyzing what's already happened and showing you patterns. It tells you what was. But taste, that's about the future. It's the skill that helps you look at all the possibilities and decide what should be. It's about creation. So, why is this so critical right now? The answer, in one word, is AI. The rise of artificial intelligence is completely changing the way we work, especially in creative and strategic fields. And in this new world, our human judgment becomes more valuable, not less.
The new partnership kind of looks like this. AI becomes this incredible engine for generating options, just countless ideas, designs, strategies, you name it. Its strength is quantity. But the human role, our job is to provide the quality, the direction, and most importantly, the meaning. We become the curators, the editors. We are the ones who choose.
I mean, think about it. In a world where AI can copy a competitor's strategy or design in seconds, your advantage can't just come from your tools. The one thing that can't be easily copied is your refined judgment, your taste. That becomes the ultimate differentiator. It's your real competitive edge. So using your taste isn't just a smart business move. It's really an act of leadership. It's taking on the responsibility of deciding what to bring into the world, of intentionally shaping the future, whether it's a product, a team culture, or a piece of art.
And exercising real taste requires seeing the whole picture. It's not about making a bunch of separate choices or just picking the prettiest option from a list. It's about understanding the entire system, how every single piece fits together to create something that feels cohesive and meaningful.
So I'll leave you with this question to think about. As AI gives everyone access to incredible tools and endless data, the playing field is leveling out. The thing that will set you apart will be your judgment. When all the options are laid out in front of you, and they will be, how will you choose? What's going to guide your decision? That, right there, is the distinction of taste.
Today, we're going to dig into a really powerful mental model from Steve Jobs. And no, this isn't about his life story or even the gadgets he made. It's about a fundamental way of thinking that can totally reshape your impact at work. It's this idea of system ownership. And to really get why it's so important, we have to start with the frustration I think we've all felt. So let me ask you this. Have you ever just poured everything you have into a project? You absolutely nailed your part, only to see the final result come out feeling kinda clunky or just fine. It's a super common and honestly a deeply frustrating feeling at work. And the reason for that frustration often feels like you've hit some kind of invisible ceiling, right? It's this barrier that just seems to cap how effective your best work can be, no matter how hard you try or how skilled you are. And here's the diagnosis. The problem really is all about perspective. When we, and pretty much everyone on our team, are just laser focused on our own little slice of the pie, our task, our department's goal, our potential to make a real difference gets fundamentally stuck. And this brings us to the real root of that capped impact. It's this state of disconnection, where all these brilliant individual parts just don't add up to a brilliant whole. The idea we're exploring calls this fragmented responsibility. So what is fragmented responsibility? Well, think about a typical company. Engineering builds a thing, then marketing has to figure out how to talk about it, and then customer support has to clean up the mess when it doesn't quite work the way a user expected. See? Each team does their job, but they're basically working in silos without a real shared picture of the entire journey. This is just the default setting in so many places. And this is exactly where Steve Jobs' philosophy comes in as this radical alternative. He just couldn't stand the friction and the noise that comes from all those internal silos. So he completely rejected that fragmented way of working. For him, the product wasn't just the thing in the box. No, the entire system was the product. And that was a huge shift in thinking. This quote just nails it, doesn't it? Isolated excellence, a perfectly written piece of code or a really clever ad campaign, that's not enough. Jobs knew that a truly great experience for a person only happens when every single piece works together like it's one thing, seamlessly. And hey, this wasn't just some abstract idea. I mean, look at how he built Apple. The hardware team couldn't just throw their designs over the wall to the software team. The design of the iPhone was totally connected to the design of the box it came in, which was totally connected to the feeling of walking into an Apple store and getting help. All of it. Every single piece was treated as one single unified system. So why on earth would you go to all this trouble? Why force this crazy level of integration? Well, the reason is actually incredibly simple, but it is also profoundly important. It all boils down to focusing on the one thing that actually matters. And this is the absolute key. A customer has no idea that your hardware and software teams don't eat lunch together. They don't see the cracks between your marketing promise and what your support team can actually deliver. To them, it's all just your company. They experience the entire system as one single thing. And you know what? The user's reality is the only one that counts. So this really gives us two totally different ways to operate as professionals. On one side, you've got the fragmented view. Your focus is my slice of the work. The result? Capped impact. And your goal is just isolated excellence. But on the other side, you've got the system view. Here, your focus shifts to the user's entire experience. The result is that your influence starts to grow and the goal becomes integrated excellence. It's a huge shift from asking, did I do my part right, to did we deliver a great experience? Okay, so understanding this is the first step for sure, but applying it, that's where the magic really happens. And this isn't just some philosophy for CEOs. This is a real, practical way for you to grow your own influence no matter what your job title is. Here's the deal. Your influence in any organization grows in direct proportion to how well you understand the whole system. The moment you can talk intelligently about how your work connects to marketing and to sales and to support, you stop being just another cog in the machine. You become a systems thinker, and that is a perspective that is absolutely invaluable. So, I want to leave you with a question to chew on. Think about your own work, your own company. Where are the seams? Where does the baton get dropped between teams? Where does the customer feel the friction that's caused by your company's internal silos? Just finding those seams? That's the very first step to fixing them. So here's the big takeaway. Real, lasting influence doesn't come from your title or where you sit on the org chart. It comes from taking responsibility for the entire system that delivers value to a user. It comes from owning the experience. And that kind of ownership, well, that's available to anyone at any level who decides they want to see the bigger picture.
All right, let's jump right in. We're not here to go through a biography of Steve Jobs. Instead, we're going to dig into the powerful framework of his mind. We're going to deconstruct his incredibly disciplined, almost architectural way of creating value, a way of thinking that honestly is more important right now than ever before. I mean, think about it. We are absolutely swimming in data. We've got analytics, dashboards, and metrics for literally everything. We can measure engagement, clicks, time on page, you name it. But it kind of begs a pretty critical question, doesn't it? With all this information, are we actually making things better? Or are we just getting better at measuring things that might not even matter in the long run? And that right there, that leads us straight into what you could call the measurement trap. It's such a common pitfall, and you see it in almost every single profession. We have this natural, almost magnetic pull to focus our energy on what's tangible, on what's easy to count, just because we can count it.
And this, right here, this is the perfect picture of that great divide in modern work. On one hand, you've got the world we measure, all the features, the clicks, the engagement metrics. But on the other hand, you have the world that actually matters, where a real person experiences confusion or friction, or, if you're lucky, delight. We spend so much of our time trying to optimize the metrics, but where we actually make our mark, where our legacy is built, is on the feeling.
Okay, so if that's the trap, what's the way out? What's the alternative? Well, this is really where looking at how Jobs' thought offers a completely different and pretty powerful shift in perspective. It's all about making a conscious choice to aim for a totally different target with our optimization efforts.
And this is a really fundamental shift from how most things are developed today. For him, the goal was never to win some spec war or to have the longest list of features on a product page. It was a complete and total rejection of that more is better mindset.
This right here was the master switch. The entire creative process was flipped on its head and reoriented around something you can't touch, an emotional outcome. It stopped being about what does this thing do and became all about what does it feel like to use it. That feeling of simplicity, of confidence, of empowerment, that was the real product.
But here's the key. Feeling isn't some mushy, vague concept. It wasn't accidental. For Jobs, it was a deliberately designed structure.
An architecture, really, with very specific, non-negotiable parts that he focused on relentlessly. So let's actually break that architecture down.
Okay, first up, it all starts at the very, very beginning. The unboxing of a product, the first screen you see, that initial handshake between a person and the technology. That first moment sets the entire tone for the relationship. You either build immediate trust and a sense of delight, or you plant a little seed of doubt right from the get-go.
Next, and this is a big one, he had what you could almost call an allergic reaction to confusion. Any single point where a user might have to stop and think, wait, what am I supposed to do now? He saw that as a total failure of design. The path forward had to feel completely intuitive, almost inevitable. This obsession with clarity is what made incredibly complex technology feel effortless and simple.
And finally, there was this deep obsession with hunting down and eliminating friction. And we're not talking about major roadblocks here. We're talking about the little things. An extra click to get something done. A loading animation that's just a little too slow. A menu option with confusing words. You know, these tiny little annoyances, they add up. It's like grains of sand in a perfectly tuned machine, slowly degrading the whole experience. The real work was in polishing every single one of those gears until they were smooth.
And this is where it all circles back to that problem we started with. You can't really quantify the absence of confusion on a dashboard, can you? Or the feeling of a great first impression. These things live outside the world of typical analytics. And yet, they are the absolute bedrock on which customer trust and real lasting loyalty are built.
Okay, so this all sounds great in theory, but how do we actually use this? How do we escape that measurement trap and start building a better architecture of experience in the work that we do? Well, it really boils down to asking yourself one single, incredibly clarifying question. Just think about that for a second. Seriously, who is it? Not who signs the check, not your boss, not some algorithm. Who is the actual human being at the very end of this chain of work? Is it a customer, a colleague, a reader, a patient? Who are they really?
Because the moment you get a crystal clear answer to that question, the moment you can actually picture that person in your mind, everything just shifts. Your priorities have to change. You stop asking, did I finish the task? And you start asking, how is this going to feel for them? It forces empathy right into the very center of your process.
You know, at the end of the day, the numbers on a dashboard, they're forgotten. The clicks, they just fade away. What lasts, what sticks with people, is the memory of the experience, the feeling of being understood, of being respected, of being valued. That is the only metric that truly endures.
And so that really just leaves us with one final and maybe more personal question to think about. When people interact with what you create, whether it's a product, a presentation, an email, a project, what's the feeling you leave them with? When all is said and done, what will they remember about you? All right, today we're going to dig into a really powerful and honestly a kind of uncomfortable idea. It comes from the way Steve Jobs thought about things, and it tackles a fear that I think we all have professionally, and that's the fear of being misunderstood. So let's just start with this quote right here. Clarity often looks wrong before it looks obvious. Just let that one sink in for a second. What it's really saying is that a truly new, truly clear idea, well, it's not going to make sense to everyone right away. In fact, to most people, it'll probably seem a little off, or maybe even completely wrong. And you know, this brings us to a huge question for anyone trying to build something new, or lead a team, or just think for themselves. Why is it that vision gets so much pushback? You can have this idea that feels so crystal clear in your own head, so powerful, but when you share it, you get these blank stares, or skepticism, maybe even flat-out rejection. So what's going on there?
To figure that out, we first have to understand this invisible force that's always shaping our careers. It's like this constant, powerful gravity that's always pulling us back to the middle, back to the safety of what everybody already knows and agrees on.
Yeah, this force, it's not some official company policy, right? It's that subtle pressure you feel to just conform. It's that deep-down desire we all have for our work to be liked, to be validated immediately. And what's fueling all of this? It's the fear of being seen as weird or out of touch or just wrong. It all comes down to that fear of being misunderstood.
So this really lays out the fundamental choice we all have to make. On one side, you've got that safe path. And hey, it promises acceptance, you know what to expect, and the risk is pretty low. Your work is understood because it fits into all the neat little boxes that already exist. But then, there's the other path, the path of original, meaningful work. And just look at the characteristics. They're the total opposite. A high chance of being misunderstood, a ton of uncertainty, and it requires this massive amount of personal conviction just to keep going.
Okay, so if that safe path is so comfortable, how does anything new ever get made? Well, this leads us to an idea that Steve Jobs seemed to just get in his bones. We can call it the price of originality.
You know, it's so easy for us to look at Apple's success now and just assume everyone always thought it was obvious, but it really wasn't. Jobs got a ton of criticism, especially in the early days. He just understood this critical timeline. Vision shows up long before validation does. The rest of the world doesn't see a breakthrough and get it instantly. It takes time for everyone to catch up, and he was willing to live in that gap.
So let's just put a clear definition on this. The cost of originality. It's really just about accepting that being misunderstood for a while is part of the deal. It's not a sign you've messed up. It's the price of admission you pay for doing work that actually matters, for pushing things beyond what's comfortable and familiar.
And this right here, this is the core mental shift that can unlock so much. It's about completely reframing what it means when someone just doesn't get your idea right off the bat. Think about it. In school, at our first jobs, we're trained to think the feedback loop is super simple. If people understand you, you win. If they don't, you lose. Either you did a bad job explaining it, or your idea was just bad. We carry that black and white thinking around with us, and it makes us backpedal at the very first sign of confusion.
But what if there's a totally different way to look at this? What if that friction, that moment of confusion from your audience, what if it's not a stop sign? What if it's actually a flare going up signaling that you've left the crowded shoreline behind and you are now out in truly uncharted waters? It means you're actually onto something new.
And this just nails the whole point perfectly. As the source material puts it, Jobs' example reframes discomfort as a signal of direction, not failure. So that feeling of friction, it becomes useful information. It confirms that you're pushing into a space where the old maps just don't work anymore. You're the one drawing the new map.
Okay, so this is a really fascinating way to think, but it can feel a little abstract. How do we actually take this idea and use it in our own work, on our own projects, in the way we lead?
So let's be super clear. This is not a license to be arrogant. This isn't about just plugging your ears and ignoring every piece of criticism. That's not courage, that's just being stubborn. No, the courage to be misunderstood comes from a deep, internal conviction, and it's anchored to your own really high standards for quality and for clarity.
So here's a simple little mental model you can use. First, when you hit that resistance, don't immediately panic. Try to see that discomfort as a potential signal that you're onto something original. Second, check in with yourself. Is this idea really anchored to my highest standards? Do I truly believe in this with conviction? And third, you have to trust the process. If the vision is right, validation will come, but it's on its own schedule, not yours. Look, if there's one thing to take away from all of this, let it be this right here. That burning desire we have for everyone to get it and approve of it right away, that is the enemy of doing truly meaningful work. The biggest contributions, the most game-changing ideas, they almost always go through a phase of being misunderstood. It's just a necessary, and in the end, a really productive part of the whole journey.
And that brings us to one last question, something for you to think about. As you look at your own work, your team, your personal ambitions, ask yourself this: what idea am I chasing that I believe in so much that it's actually worth the temporary price of being misunderstood?
You know, when you think about Steve Jobs, the word perfectionist probably comes to mind pretty quickly. But what if we've been looking at that all wrong? Today, we're going to dig into his obsession with excellence, not as some kind of personality quirk, but as a really powerful guiding philosophy. And it has some huge implications for how we all work today. So we have to start with this big question, right? Was Jobs' insane drive for perfection just a character flaw? Was it all just an ego trip? Or was it something deeper? Something more like a moral principle that guided every single thing he did? I mean, the popular story, the one we've all heard, is that he was just this impossible boss, right? That his obsession with every little detail was all driven by ego. And look, it's an easy story to believe. But the reality is actually so much more profound than that. It points to a motivation that wasn't really about his ego at all. It was about a core belief that completely changes how we should think about quality in our own work. And this is the key idea right here. For Jobs, perfectionism wasn't about him. It was an act of respect. It was respect for the user's time and their intelligence. It was respect for the craft, for the art of building something truly great. And, it was ultimately respect for the work itself, this belief that it deserved to be done to the absolute highest standard possible. And wow, this idea just lands with so much force in the world we live in right now. We're in this era that just celebrates speed, getting things out the door fast. And now with AI tools that can spit out a million options in a second, that pressure is even crazier. Done is almost always seen as better than perfect. But Jobs' philosophy, it challenges that head on. So, really, we're all faced with two paths. The first path is just speed without standards. It feels super productive, for sure, but it quietly eats away at the most important thing you have, trust. The second path is what you could call purposeful excellence. Yeah, it's slower, it's more deliberate, but that's how you build things that actually last. Things that create real loyalty and, by the way, attract the very best people to work with you. The really dangerous thing about that first path is that mediocrity, it just compounds so quietly. A little compromise here, a small shortcut there. None of them feel like a big deal on their own, but over time, they all add up, and suddenly, you have a culture of good enough. The decay in quality is so gradual, you barely even notice it's happening. But excellence, that's what people remember. Just think about a product or a service that you absolutely love. You don't remember how fast it was shipped. You remember the care, the thought, the quality that went into it. That's what makes a lasting impact. That's what builds a brand people will pay more for, a brand they're fiercely loyal to. Okay, so this brings us to the real-world challenge, right? The why makes sense, but how do you actually choose excellence when the world is constantly screaming at you to go faster? Well, the way forward really boils down to two crucial steps. First, you have to connect your high standards to a bigger purpose. And second, you have to find the courage to actually enforce those standards with real decisiveness. Let's break down that first step. High standards for their own sake, that just feels picky, right? But when those standards are directly tied to a clear purpose, like, say, creating the best possible experience for your customer, they become this incredibly powerful motivating force. That's when perfectionism stops being about ego and starts being about service. And that leads us to the second and honestly much harder step. To protect those standards, you have to be decisive. This is the tough part. It means saying no to work that just isn't good enough, even when it's super inconvenient. It means having those difficult conversations to protect the integrity of the work and the trust of the people you serve. It all comes back to this one simple, powerful truth that really guided Steve Jobs' entire career. Excellence is remembered long after speed is forgotten. That's the fundamental choice that we all face in our work, every single day. So that leaves us with one final question for you to think about. When all the deadlines have passed and the projects are finally done, what will your work be remembered for? Will it be its speed, or will it be its excellence? Have you ever been in a meeting where a really sharp, brilliant idea slowly gets sanded down by the committee until it's, just kind of okay? It's a story we've all seen play out in our modern workflow. In the rush to get everyone on board and to minimize any friction, we often lose the very conviction that made the idea special in the first place. Okay, let's dive into this. Today, we're going to explore a really powerful alternative, a mindset for making decisions, one that was exemplified by thinkers like Steve Jobs, that intentionally trades the comfort of consensus for something way more potent, clarity. And this slide, it really frames the central tension perfectly. On one side, you've got the path of consensus. And look, it feels safe, right? It feels inclusive, and it definitely avoids conflict. But the result is often predictable. It's just an average of all the inputs. But on the other side, you have conviction. Now, this path requires a strong, focused point of view. Its destination isn't safety, it's clarity, a sharp, unambiguous, and potent result that just cuts right through the noise. So, let's unpack this gravitational pull we have towards consensus. Why do we default to it so often? And what's the real cost of making group agreement our main goal? Now, what's so interesting here is how counterintuitive this feels. We're taught that democratic processes are inherently fair, and often they are. But when it comes to creative work or design or high-stakes strategy, trying to satisfy everyone often means you don't truly move anyone. You see, averaging out a dozen opinions doesn't produce a masterpiece. It produces a compromise. It's a signal that gets lost in all the noise. So, this brings us to the alternative model. If consensus isn't always the answer, then what is? Let's explore a different way to lead, one that prioritizes a clear, singular vision over a watered-down agreement. The term for this is opinionated leadership, and it is so important to get what this means, and maybe more importantly, what it doesn't mean. This is not about being a dictator or just ignoring what everyone else thinks. The whole point of this model is to generate clarity, and it does that by giving the final decision to a single accountable owner. This makes sure there's one person responsible for the coherence of the vision. In fact, for this model to work, it absolutely depends on a really rigorous process of gathering input. An effective leader actively seeks out all the different perspectives, the challenges, the data. They listen intently, trying to absorb the full spectrum of thought. The process of gathering information should be deeply collaborative and totally open. So, the crucial point is right here. The real difference isn't in the listening, it's in the deciding. When one single person is responsible for taking all that input and turning it into a final decision, the vision stays coherent. It doesn't get diluted by a bunch of competing agendas or watered down by compromise. This is how you protect a bold idea from becoming, well, bland. So, for this kind of leadership to really work, to be effective and not just autocratic, it can't just be based on a whim. It has to be built on a strong foundation. And that brings us to the 3 essential pillars that make it all possible. First, there's conviction. Now, this isn't stubbornness just for the sake of being stubborn. It is a deep, well-reasoned belief in a particular direction. It's about having a clear point of view on what quality actually looks like, and then having the discipline to fight for that standard, especially when you're getting pressure to compromise. Second is taste. I know this can feel like a pretty abstract word, but in a professional context, think of it as a highly developed sense of judgment. It's that intuition for excellence, the ability to tell the difference between good enough and truly great. It's a quiet confidence in what the right path forward looks, feels, and functions like, almost like a curator's sense of what to include, and even more importantly, what to leave out. And finally, the pillar that holds this whole thing together, accountability. Look, if you have the authority to make the final call, you absolutely must have the integrity to own the outcome, completely. Success or failure, it rests on your shoulders. This is the essential check and balance that makes opinionated leadership responsible, not reckless. So when you combine these 3 pillars, conviction, taste, and accountability, you start to see a very different and maybe a more honest picture of what professional leadership is fundamentally all about. And this quote just brilliantly illustrates the core trade-off. A leader who's focused on achieving clarity will inevitably have to make decisions that aren't universally popular. The goal isn't to be liked by everyone. The goal is to guide the team toward the best possible outcome, with intention. Ultimately, this is the job. It's not about facilitating a process. It's about being responsible for the results. True leadership means shouldering the weight of that responsibility and having the courage to make a clear, decisive call, even when it's the hard thing to do. So this leaves us with a final thought to chew on. As you think about your own work, your projects, your teams, ask yourself this. In an age of endless information and AI-generated noise, where are you defaulting to the safety of consensus when what's really needed is the sharp edge of clarity? Where does your work demand a leader with conviction, taste, and the courage to be accountable for the outcome? You know, when we think about Steve Jobs, our minds usually jump to the things he built. The iPhone, the Mac, right? The products that literally changed the world. But the real lesson, the part that's actually useful for us today, it isn't in what he did, it's in how he thought. So today, we're going to deconstruct the mental disciplines that fueled his incredible judgment, giving us a framework that's more important now than ever. Let's start with a hard truth about the world we work in today. Just getting stuff done, plain old execution, it's everywhere. It's becoming a commodity. We have more tools, more freelancers, more ways to just do things than at any point in history. But knowing what to do, knowing which direction to aim all that energy and all those resources, now that is incredibly rare. That's the scarce resource. And high-quality judgment is what makes the real difference between being busy and being impactful. And guess what's pouring gasoline on this fire? AI. As artificial intelligence gets scary good at handling the execution, writing the code, drafting the copy, analyzing the data, our value as humans has to shift. Our most critical, irreplaceable asset becomes our ability to decide, to discern, and to direct. It's all about judgment. And this is exactly why we're looking at Steve Jobs. But not as some kind of mythical genius we can't possibly relate to. No, We're going to look at him as a case study. We're going to reframe this idea of genius away from something he was born with and see it for what it was, a result of specific, cultivated ways of thinking. Okay, this right here is probably the most important shift in perspective we're going to make. Let's get away from this idea of innate traits, these fixed passive things you either have or you don't. And instead, let's talk about disciplines. Disciplines are active. They're practices that you cultivate, that you develop. And that's what makes this whole approach so powerful. It means it's accessible to any of us. So where do we start? Well, we start on the inside. The first two disciplines are all about achieving inner clarity. See, before you can create anything amazing in the outside world, you have to create some order in your internal world. It all comes down to how Jobs managed his own mind and his own attention to make space for big things to happen. For Steve Jobs, focus wasn't just, concentrating on something. It was an active, almost aggressive act of elimination. He famously said it's about saying no to 1,000 things. It's the discipline of protecting what's truly important from all of the good ideas that could so easily distract you. It's a shield. And this one is so misunderstood. This isn't about minimalism or just making things look clean. For Jobs, true simplicity was the reward you got after wrestling a complex problem to the ground. It's that beautiful, profound clarity that only comes when you understand something so deeply that you can find its simple, elegant heart. Okay, so once you have that inner clarity, that focus, and that deep simplicity, what's next? Well, it has to show up in the real world. So the next two disciplines are all about that translation. How do you take that internal state and turn it into an external reality? Into products and experiences people can actually touch and feel. Taste, it isn't just some random preference. It's a developed sensibility. Think of it like a muscle. It's something Jobs actively trained by studying the best in design, in calligraphy, in engineering. It's that practiced intuition that helps you see the difference not just between bad and good, but between good and insanely great. This discipline was really the soul of Apple's philosophy. So many tech companies, they start with the technology, with what they can build, and then they try to figure out who to sell it to. Jobs flipped that completely on its head. He insisted you start with the user experience, the feeling, the need, and only then do you work backward to invent the technology that serves it. It's a masterclass in empathy. All right, finally, we get to the two mindsets that hold everything else up. Think of these as the foundation. Without these two disciplines, the other practices, they just don't have the power they need to truly take root and flourish. This is the ability to zoom all the way out and see the entire playing field. Jobs didn't just see a product. He saw the hardware, the software, the marketing, the retail store. He saw it all as one single integrated system. He understood that you can't touch one part without affecting all the other parts. And honestly, this is the one that holds it all together. You can have all the focus, all the simplicity, all the taste in the world, but it means nothing without the courage to stand by it. This is about having the conviction to trust your judgment, especially when everyone else is telling you you're wrong. It's what it takes to bring something truly new into the world. So, when you pull it all together, you see, these aren't just 6 separate tips on a list. They're a connected, integrated system for thinking. They all feed into and reinforce each other, and together they create this incredibly powerful framework for developing better judgment. This quote really just gets to the heart of it all. We're not studying Steve Jobs to copy his tactics, right? We're not all going to go out and buy a black turtleneck. We're studying his approach to train a timeless skill, the ability to exercise incredible judgment when things are messy and uncertain. So here it is, the whole system in one place. You start with ruthless focus to cut through the noise. That leads you to the deep simplicity at the heart of the idea. You then polish that idea with cultivated taste and make sure it's grounded in a user obsession. You see how it all fits into the bigger picture with system thinking, and finally, you make it real with the courage to stand alone. Look, this framework isn't just some interesting theory. It's a call to practice. So the real question, the one I want to leave you with, is for you. As you look at these 6 disciplines, which one does your work or your life demand from you right now? Which one are you going to choose to actively cultivate first? You know the feeling, right? In our work today, the pressure is just constant. Do more, move faster, be more productive. We're always told that the secret to getting amazing results is just to work harder and get better tools. But is that really the whole story? Let's take a look at a different way of thinking, a path forged by a true master of simplicity. See, the source of truly great work, it's not just about being the first one to the finish line. A frantic pace, that usually just leads to frantic, unfocused work. Real impact, the kind that lasts, is almost never a product of just sheer speed. And it's definitely not about collecting more tools. I mean, we are drowning in new apps, new software, new frameworks, all of them promising to be some kind of magic bullet. But honestly, more tools often just create more complexity, and they pull us away from the actual problem we're trying to solve. And finally, it's not about just being the loudest person in the room or having the most visible hustle. Yeah, making a lot of noise and looking busy can seem like progress, but a lot of the time, it's just that, noise. So if the answer isn't speed or tools or just being loud, what is it? Well, to find an answer, we can look at someone who built an absolute empire on a totally different foundation, Steve Jobs. But we're not going to talk about the products he built. No, we're going to talk about how he thought, because his real genius wasn't in the technology itself, it was in his mental operating system. His whole approach, it started with an obsession with clarity, this drive to boil down incredibly complex problems into their simplest form. That required a ruthless discipline of focus, saying no to 1,000 things just to protect that one important thing. It also meant having a total intolerance for noise, for anything that distracted from the mission. And all of it, every decision was guided by this deep, intuitive sense of taste, just knowing what felt right and what was truly excellent. And that really brings us to the big question we all face in our own work. If it's not all the stuff we're usually told to do, then what is the real fundamental source of doing great, impactful work? The answer is so simple, but it's incredibly profound. Clarity precedes impact. Think about that. You just can't have a big effect without first having a deep, crystal clear understanding of what you're trying to do, why it's so important, and what problem you're really solving. Impact is just what happens after you get clear. This practice actually has a name. It's called intentional thinking. It's the discipline of hitting pause. It's the work you do before the work. It's about taking the time to get absolutely clear on the most important problem before you even think about writing a line of code or designing a slide or setting up a meeting. It's kind of like the difference between building a house with a blueprint versus just showing up with a hammer and some nails and hoping for the best.
Okay, so why is this so important for us, right here, right now? In a world where tech and tools are changing faster than ever, especially with AI, what's the thing we should really be holding on to?
Well, look at it this way. Tools are tactical, right? Their lifespan is super short. The hot new app today is old news by tomorrow. But ideas, these foundational principles like clarity precedes impact, they last. They're strategic, they don't go out of style, they're the bedrock you can build anything on no matter what new tech comes along. And that's really the key, isn't it? If you only master the tools, you're always going to be reacting to the next new thing. But if you master the underlying ideas, you're the one who can see what's coming. You're the one who can think strategically and shape how those new tools get used. You become the architect, not just the builder. So the goal for all of us is to start cultivating this intentional way of thinking in every part of our professional lives. To bring that deep clarity to the projects we take on, to the way we lead our teams, and to our own personal growth. It's really about a commitment to developing a higher quality of judgment.
So we'll leave you with this question. Before you jump back into the rush of your day, just take a second to think. Right now, in your work, in your life, what is the single most important idea that you need to get absolute clarity on? If you can find that, you'll find your path to making a real impact.